The moment I saw Linda Patterson from the HOA standing at my door with that folder tucked under her arm, I knew my peaceful Tuesday morning was about to go sideways. "Mr. Emerson," she said, her lips pressed into a thin line that probably passed for a smile in her world. "We need to discuss your property." I leaned against the doorframe of my house in Boulder, Colorado, still holding my coffee mug. "Morning to you too, Linda. What seems to be the problem?" She pulled out a document from her folder, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the paper. "The HOA board has been reviewing property boundaries in our development, and we've discovered that the Sledding hill behind your lot actually falls under community property jurisdiction." I almost choked on my coffee. "Excuse me." "The hill," she repeated, speaking slowly like I was hard of hearing. "It's technically part of the community green space according to our interpretation of the original development plans." I set my mug down on the small table by my door. "Linda, that hill has been part of my property since I bought this place 5 years ago. It's clearly marked on my deed." She waved her hand dismissively. "The original developer included language about community recreational areas. The board believes the hill falls under that designation." "The board believes." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "Do you have any actual legal documentation to support this?" Linda's expression hardened. "Mr. Emerson, the HOA board has consulted with our attorney, and we're prepared to assert our rights to this property. We're giving you courtesy notice that we'll be installing community signage and possibly some benches on the hill within the next 2 weeks. I straightened up, my 6'2" frame suddenly feeling very useful. "You're not putting anything on my property, Linda. I suggest you have your attorney actually look at my property deed before you do something you'll regret." Her face flushed red. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you," I said calmly. "That hill is mine. It's been surveyed, it's on my deed, and I pay property taxes on it. If you set foot on it without my permission, that's trespassing." Linda's eyes narrowed. "The HOA has rights, Mr. Emerson. We'll see what our lawyer has to say about your attitude." She spun on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus, probably already planning her next move. I grabbed my phone and called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen. The second Linda's car disappeared down the street. Marcus had handled my property purchase, and if anyone knew the boundaries of my land, it was him. "Trevor," Marcus answered on the second ring. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, and I could practically hear him shaking his head over the phone. "They don't have a leg to stand on," Marcus said. "I have your survey right here in your file. That hill is definitely within your property lines. The community green space is on the other side of the development, near the playground. Can you send me a certified copy of everything?" I asked. "I have a feeling this isn't going to be a simple conversation." "I'll do you one better," Marcus said. "I'll send a formal letter to the HOA's attorney with all the documentation. Sometimes these things just need an official response to die down." I thanked him and hung up, but something in my gut told me Linda Patterson wasn't the type to back down easily. I'd seen her in action at HOA meetings. She'd been on the board for 7 years and treated the position like she was running a small country. Sure enough, 2 days later, I came home from my job at the software company downtown to find survey stakes planted all over the Sledding hill. Not my survey stakes. New ones, with little orange flags bearing the HOA logo. I took pictures of everything with my phone, making sure to get clear shots of each stake and their positions. Then I called Marcus again. "They're escalating," I told him. "They've put their own survey markers on my property." Marcus sighed. "I sent that letter yesterday. Their attorney should have received it this morning. Let me make a call." An hour later, Marcus called back. "Their attorney is someone named Gerald Hutchinson." He apparently told the HOA board that they might have a case based on some vague language in the original CC and Articus about recreational spaces. I read him the actual survey description and your deed. He got quiet. So they'll back off. Hutchinson will probably advise them to, Marcus said. But he can't control what his clients actually do. I document everything, Trevor. Take photos, keep records of every interaction. I spent that evening researching property law in Colorado, specifically about boundary disputes and HOA overreach. What I found was interesting. While HOAs in Colorado had significant power, they couldn't just claim private property without going through proper legal channels. And if they trespassed or damaged my property, I had several options for recourse. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up to the sound of machinery. I pulled on jeans and a jacket and walked out to find a landscaping crew starting to level an area on my sledding hill. Linda Patterson stood nearby with another board member, clipboard in hand. I marched up the hill. Stop! Everyone stop what you're doing. The crew chief, a weathered man in his 50s, looked confused. We were hired to do some work here. By who? I demanded. The HOA, he said, pointing at Linda. I turned to Linda. Get off my property. Now, she crossed her arms. This is community property, Mr. Emerson. The board voted and we're moving forward with improvements. I'm calling the sheriff, I said, pulling out my phone. Linda's companion, a thin woman named Deborah, spoke up. You can't have us arrested for working on HOA property. Watch me. I dialed 911 and explained that I had trespassers on my private property who were operating heavy equipment without permission. The landscaping crew had already started packing up. The crew chief approached me. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. If this is a property dispute, we're out. Smart move, I told him. Linda's face had gone from red to purple. We're paying you for the full day. Not worth it, lady, the crew chief said. You should have made sure you actually owned the land before hiring us. He and his crew were gone within 15 minutes. The Boulder County Sheriff's deputy who arrived was professional and thorough. Deputy Rodriguez listened to both sides, asked to see my property deed, which I'd had the foresight to print out that morning, and then asked Linda for her documentation. She had a copy of the CC and Articus with certain passages highlighted. Deputy Rodriguez read them carefully, then looked at my deed again. Madam, he said to Linda, these covenants talk about community green spaces, but they don't override a property deed. The deed clearly shows this hill as part of Mr. Emerson's lot. But our attorney said, Linda started. I'd suggest you go back to your attorney, Rodriguez interrupted, because if Mr. Emerson wants to press charges for trespassing, he'd be within his rights. I'm going to recommend that the HOA stays off this property until you get a court order saying otherwise. This is ridiculous, Linda snapped. The HOA has rules that have to follow the law, Rodriguez said firmly. He turned to me. Do you want to press charges, Mr. Emerson? I considered it. Not at this time, but I want it on record that I've warned them to stay off my property. Rodriguez nodded and made notes in his report. It's documented. I'd suggest getting some no trespassing signs up just to make it crystal clear. After everyone left, I drove to the hardware store and bought a dozen large no trespassing private property signs. I posted them around the perimeter of the hill, making sure they were clearly visible. Then, I installed a trail camera to monitor any activity. That evening, Marcus called with an update. Hutchinson reached out to me. He's trying to get the HOA to back down, but apparently Linda Patterson is being difficult. She's convinced she's right and that you're just being uncooperative. What's our next move? I'd recommend a formal cease and desist letter from me to the HOA board directly, not just their attorney. Sometimes putting it in stark legal terms helps people understand the reality of their situation. Do it, I said. The letter went out Monday morning via certified mail. By Wednesday, I'd received a response, but not from the HOA attorney. It was from Linda herself, on HOA letterhead. The letter informed me that the HOA was fining me $500 for unauthorized signage that does not comply with community aesthetic standards, and another $500 for interfering with board-approved community improvements. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Then I called Marcus and read him the letter. "They're insane," Marcus said bluntly. "You can't fine someone for defending their own property. I'll respond to this, but Trevor, I think we need to consider filing a lawsuit. This has moved beyond a simple dispute. They're harassing you now." "Let's give them one more chance to be reasonable," I said. "But start drafting the lawsuit papers just in case." That weekend, I decided to take a different approach. I'd been doing some digging into the property records for the entire development, and I discovered something interesting. The access road that led to Linda Patterson's house and 3 other board members' houses crossed through a corner of my property. It was a small strip, maybe 20 feet wide, but it was definitely mine according to the survey. The developer had included an easement for access when the neighborhood was built, but that easement was granted by the original owner before I purchased the property. When I bought the land, I'd inherited that easement, but there was something in the legal language that caught my attention. The easement could be revoked with proper notice if the parties using it violated certain terms, including harassment or legal action against the grantor of the easement. I brought this to Marcus's attention Monday morning. He was quiet for a long moment. "That's an unusual clause, but yes, it's in there. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? If they want to claim my hill is theirs, maybe I should remind them that they're using my land every day to get to their houses." Marcus chuckled. "It's aggressive, but it might wake them up to reality. However, we'd need to follow the proper legal procedure. You can't just block the road." "What would the procedure be?" "You'd need to send formal notice of easement violation. Give them 30 days to cure the violation, and then you could legally revoke the easement." "But Trevor, if you do that, they'd have no legal way to access their homes. They'd have to go to court immediately." "Which would force a judge to look at all of this," I said, "including their attempts to steal my property." "Exactly. It's a risky move, but it could work." I thought about it for the rest of the day. I wasn't naturally a confrontational person, but Linda and her board had pushed this situation into absurdity. They'd trespassed, attempted to damage my property, filed bogus fines, and refused to accept legal documentation proving they were wrong. That evening, I walked the access road, really looking at it for the first time since this dispute started. It was a narrow paved path that branched off from the main neighborhood street and wound through some trees before reaching 4 houses on the far side of the development. Those houses backed up to protected wetlands, which was why they needed this specific access route. Without it, they'd have to drive nearly 2 miles around to reach the public road entrance on the other side of the wetlands. Linda's house was the largest, a sprawling ranch with a 3-car garage. Next to it were Deborah's house and 2 other board members' homes. Of the 7-member HOA board, 4 of them relied on this road. The next morning, I gave Marcus the go-ahead to draft the formal notice of easement violation. The notice cited the HOA's trespassing, their attempt to seize my property, and the harassment via baseless fines as violations of the easement terms. The notice went out certified mail on Thursday. According to the easement terms, they had 30 days from receipt to cease all violations and withdraw any claims to my property. If they failed to do so, I could revoke the easement. I expected anger. What I got was worse. Silence. Linda didn't call. No one from the board reached out. I didn't receive any more violation notices. It was like they'd decided to pretend nothing was happening. 10 days after the notice went out, I checked my trail camera footage and saw something that made my blood boil. Late at night, someone had come onto my property and removed several of my no trespassing signs. The camera clearly showed a figure in dark clothing pulling up the signs and carrying them away. I downloaded the footage and sent it to both Marcus and Deputy Rodriguez. Rodriguez called me the next day. "The footage isn't clear enough to identify who it is," he said. "But it's definitely trespassing and theft. You should file a formal report." I went to the sheriff's office and filed the report. I also bought better cameras, ones with night vision and higher resolution, and installed them at multiple points around the property. 2 weeks into the 30-day notice period, Marcus called with news. "The HOA has filed a lawsuit against you. They're claiming adverse possession of the hill and asking the court to declare it community property." Adverse possession. They've never used that hill, I know. It's a desperation move. But here's the thing, Trevor. By filing this lawsuit, they've essentially guaranteed that the easement violation stands. They're engaged in active litigation against you, which is explicitly prohibited in the easement terms. So, after the 30 days, you can legally revoke the easement. But I'd recommend going to court to make it official. We should file for a declaratory judgment confirming your property boundaries and the easement revocation. Let's do this the right way. The lawsuit and counter-lawsuit were filed in Boulder County District Court. The initial hearing was set for 6 weeks out, which was 2 weeks after the easement notice period would expire. In the meantime, I decided to prepare for what would come next. I contacted a fencing company and got quotes for a 6-foot privacy fence around the entire perimeter of the Sledding Hill property. The quotes came in around $15,000. Expensive, but worth it to establish a clear, physical boundary. I also contacted a different fencing company and got a quote for a gate across the access road where it crossed my property. That was another $3,000. The day after the 30-day notice period expired, I had both companies start work. The privacy fence around the hill went up first, a solid wooden barrier that made it absolutely clear where my property began. The fence company installed a gate on the trail that led up to the hill, with a sturdy lock. The access road gate was more complex. It needed to be wide enough for vehicles, secure, and obviously legal. Marcus had prepared all the documentation, and I'd filed the easement revocation with the county clerk's office the morning the 30-day period ended. When the fencing crew arrived to install the gate across the access road, I was there personally to supervise. I knew this would be the moment everything came to a head. I wasn't wrong. Linda Patterson came storming down her driveway about 20 minutes after the crew started digging post holes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed, her face already red. I held up the county clerk's stamped documents. "Installing a gate on my private property. The easement that allowed you to use this road has been revoked due to your violations of the easement terms. You can't do this. We live here. We need this road. You should have thought of that before you tried to steal my land," I said calmly. "All of this is fully legal and documented. If you have a problem with it, you can bring it up at the court hearing." Deborah had joined Linda now, along with the other 2 board members who lived on the access road. One of them, a man named Frank, seemed more reasonable than the others. "Look," Frank said, "I didn't want any of this. Can we talk about a solution?" "I'm happy to discuss a licensing agreement," I said. "I own this road and you need to use it. We can work something out. A licensing agreement. Linda's voice hit a pitch that probably scared dogs. You want us to pay you to use a road we've used for free for 20 years. Technically, you never used it for free. The easement was granted by the previous owner. That's ended. If you want to use my property now, yes, we'll need an agreement. Frank rubbed his face. How much are we talking about? I'd actually thought about this. $500 per month per household. That's a licensing fee for access across my land. That's $6,000 a year, Linda shrieked. Yes. And considering you'd have to drive an extra 4 miles round trip every day otherwise, accounting for gas, time, and vehicle wear, it's actually quite reasonable. This is extortion, Linda said. It's a property usage fee, I corrected. Completely legal. You're welcome to refuse and find another route to your homes, or you can bring it up with the judge and see what he says. The gate installation took 2 days. I had the company install a keypad entry system that would allow me to provide access codes. Until the court hearing resolved everything, the gate stayed closed, and I was the only one with the code. Linda and the other 3 board members had to drive the long way around. I'd done the math, and it added about 10 minutes to their commute each way. Not the end of the world, but annoying enough to make a point. The complaints started immediately. I received angry emails, letters, and even found nasty notes left on my doorstep. Someone reported my fence to the county, claiming it was built without permits. The county inspector came out, checked my permits, which were all in order, and left. That complaint was noted in my growing file of harassment evidence. 3 weeks before the court hearing, I received a call from Frank, the reasonable board member. Trevor, he said, I want to apologize for this whole mess. I was against the Hill thing from the start. Linda convinced the board it was a legitimate claim. I appreciate that, Frank. Is there any way we can settle this? I'll be honest, the extra drive is killing me. I have to be at work by 6 in the morning, and the detour means I'm leaving at 5:15 now. I meant what I said about the licensing agreement. $500 a month, you get an access code for the gate. He was quiet for a moment. What if we, the individual homeowners, pay you, but the HOA also drops all claims to your hill and dismisses their lawsuit? Now we were getting somewhere. I'd need it in writing, signed by all board members and filed with the court. The lawsuit dismissed with prejudice, so it can't be refiled. And a formal apology from the board acknowledging the hill is my property. Let me talk to the others. That conversation apparently didn't go well, because 2 days later I got a call from Marcus. You're not going to believe this, Marcus said. The HOA board voted to start a special assessment on all homeowners in the development to fund fighting you in court. They're asking for $1,000 per household. They're making everyone pay to fund their ridiculous lawsuit. Yep. And from what I'm hearing, a lot of homeowners are furious about it. There's talk of a recall election to remove the board members. This was an interesting development. The HOA development had about 60 homes. If the residents were turning against the board, Linda's power base was crumbling. I decided to be proactive. I attended the next HOA meeting, which I was allowed to do as a homeowner. The community room was packed with angry neighbors. Linda tried to maintain control of the meeting, but people kept interrupting with questions about the special assessment. Why are we paying for this lawsuit? One woman demanded. I don't care about the stupid Sledding hill. It's a matter of principle, Linda said. The HOA must maintain its authority over community spaces. But it's not a community space, another homeowner shouted. I looked up his deed online. It's his property, I stood up. Can I say something? The room went quiet. Linda looked like she wanted to refuse, but there were too many people watching. Go ahead, Mr. Emerson, said the HOA secretary, a woman who looked thoroughly tired of the whole situation. I never wanted any of this, I said. I bought my property 5 years ago. The hill has always been mine. It's on my deed, my survey, my property tax assessment. The HOA board tried to take it anyway. They trespassed. They hired contractors to damage my land, and when that didn't work, they filed a frivolous lawsuit. All I've done is defend what's legally mine. What about the road? Someone called out. Why are you blocking Linda and the others? The access road crosses my property on an easement that had specific terms. When the HOA board violated those terms by trespassing and suing me, the easement was voided. I've offered a reasonable licensing agreement. Some of them are negotiating in good faith. Others aren't. Linda stood up. This is not appropriate. Mr. Emerson is not on the agenda. Actually, Frank said, standing up as well, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board president. I move that Linda Patterson be removed from her position effective immediately. The room erupted in chaos. Linda was shouting. People were seconding Frank's motion, and the secretary was frantically trying to figure out the correct parliamentary procedure. When order was finally restored, a vote was held. Linda Patterson was removed as board president by a margin of 43-12. Deborah resigned on the spot, and 2 other board members followed. Frank was elected as the new board president. His first act was to call for an immediate vote to dismiss the lawsuit against me. It passed unanimously. After the meeting, Frank approached me. I'll have our attorney file the dismissal tomorrow, and I'd like to personally take you up on the licensing agreement for the road access. I appreciate that, Frank. The other 3 homeowners on that road, they'll come around. Linda's being stubborn, but her husband already called me saying he's tired of the long drive. The lawsuit dismissal was filed the next day, and Marcus prepared a consent judgment that confirmed the Sledding Hill as my property. The judge signed it without even requiring a hearing, since both parties agreed. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 of the 4 households on the access road signed licensing agreements with me. Linda held out, continuing to drive the long way around. That was her choice, but I heard from neighbors that her husband was sleeping in their guest room because he was so angry about the whole situation. The licensing fees, $2,000 a month combined from the 3 households, actually more than covered my costs for installing and maintaining the gate. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about the principle, just like Linda had said. Except in my case, the principles were property rights and not being pushed around by an overreaching HOA board. The next HOA meeting was remarkably civil. Frank ran it efficiently, and the board focused on actual community issues like maintaining the playground and organizing the neighborhood garage sale. It was like watching a functional organization emerge from the ashes of Linda's dictatorship. I thought everything was wrapping up nicely. Then I came home from work one evening to find my fence damaged. Someone had taken a sledgehammer to a section of the privacy fence around the Sledding Hill, splintering several boards and knocking down an entire panel. My high-resolution cameras had caught everything. The footage clearly showed Linda Patterson's distinctive white Lexus pulling up at 2 in the morning. Linda herself got out, pulled a sledgehammer from her trunk, and spent 15 minutes attacking my fence. Her face was clearly visible in multiple shots. I called Deputy Rodriguez immediately. "That's destruction of property," Rodriguez said after viewing the footage. "That's a criminal offense. Do you want to press charges?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I've been patient. I've tried to be reasonable, but this is criminal behavior." Rodriguez nodded. "I'll get a warrant." Linda Patterson was arrested the next morning at her home. The charge was criminal mischief and destruction of property, both misdemeanors, but serious enough that she spent several hours in jail before posting bond. The damage to my fence was estimated at $800. Linda was also charged with trespassing. Her court date was set for 6 weeks out. The arrest made local news. Not the major Denver stations, but the Boulder County newspaper ran a story about the HOA dispute that had ended in criminal charges. The article was actually pretty balanced, laying out the timeline of events and including quotes from both me and Frank, who represented the HOA's new position that the matter was resolved and unfortunate. Linda's husband, a quiet man named George who I'd only met a few times, finally called me. "Mr. Emerson, this is George Patterson. I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. I've been telling her for months to drop this, but she became obsessed with being right." "I appreciate the call, George. Would you still be willing to offer us the licensing agreement for the road?" Linda's legal troubles are her own, but I'm tired of the long commute and honestly, I'm tired of living in a war zone. "Of course. I'll have my attorney draw up the agreement. Thank you, and for what it's worth, I'll make sure Linda stays away from your property." The fourth licensing agreement was signed a week later. Linda didn't sign it. George did, as the co-owner of their property. The money was paid from their joint account, and George got his own access code for the gate. Linda's criminal case went to court on a Tuesday morning. I had to appear as the victim and present my evidence, including the camera footage. Linda's attorney tried to argue that she'd been under extreme stress and had made a mistake, but the prosecutor pointed out that driving to someone's property at 2 in the morning with a sledgehammer wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was premeditated. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Marian Kowalski. She watched the footage, reviewed the timeline of events, and listened to Linda's attorney's arguments. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Kowalski said, "I've reviewed all the materials in this case, including the property dispute that preceded this incident. From what I can see, you were clearly and repeatedly told that you had no legal claim to Mr. Emerson's property. Multiple attorneys, a sheriff's deputy, and eventually a civil court judgment all confirmed that the Sledding Hill belonged to Mr. Emerson. Yet you persisted in your attempts to claim it, culminating in this act of criminal destruction. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Linda stood up. "Your Honor, I was trying to protect my community. I've been on the HOA board for 7 years and I've always put the neighborhood first. Mr. Emerson was being selfish and uncooperative. Mrs. Patterson, defending your property from theft is not selfish. It's a fundamental right. I'm finding you guilty of criminal mischief and trespassing. I'm sentencing you to 1-year probation, 100 hours of community service, and restitution to Mr. Emerson for the damage to his fence plus court costs. Additionally, I'm issuing a restraining order. You are not to come within 100 yards of Mr. Emerson or his property for the duration of your probation. Do you understand?" Linda's face had gone pale. "Yes, Your Honor." The restraining order meant Linda couldn't even use the access road anymore, since it required crossing my property and putting her within range of me if I was home. George would have to drop her off at their house and pick her up when she needed to go somewhere, or she'd have to take the long route alone. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then, I remembered her standing on my hill with that clipboard, so certain of her authority, so ready to steamroll over my legal property rights. After the court hearing, Marcus and I went to lunch to celebrate the end of the saga. "You know," Marcus said over burgers, "in all my years practicing law, I've never seen an HOA dispute quite like this one. Most of them settle before it gets anywhere near this far." Linda was something special, I agreed. The ironic thing is, if she'd just accepted the initial documentation that the hill was yours, none of this would have happened. She'd still be HOA president, you'd never have looked into the easement issue, and everyone would have been fine. Some people can't admit they're wrong, I said. Even when it costs them everything. The following spring, the Sledding Hill saw its first big use. We got a major snowstorm in March, and I spread the word through the neighborhood that kids were welcome to use the hill. I wasn't going to be like Linda and hoard something that could bring joy to the community. The difference was, it was my choice to share my property, not something being taken from me. I stood at the top of the hill watching dozens of kids and even some adults sledding down the slope. Frank brought his grandchildren and thanked me for opening it up. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I wanted to," I told him. This was never about keeping people away. It was about not letting someone bully me into giving up what was mine. George Patterson came to the sledding day too with his teenage daughter. Linda wasn't there, of course. The restraining order and the community's general opinion of her behavior meant she'd become something of a recluse. "How's Linda doing?" I asked George. It had been 4 months since the court case, George sighed. "She's struggling. The probation, the community service, the legal bills. But honestly, I think the hardest part for her is that she's not in charge anymore. She defined herself by that board position. That's a tough way to live." It is. I'm hoping she'll eventually understand that sometimes you have to let go and admit you were wrong, but I don't know if she'll ever get there. A month after the sledding day, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Linda Patterson, handwritten on plain paper. "Mr. Emerson," it read, "I owe you an apology. I spent so many years believing that my role on the HOA board meant I knew what was best for the community that I lost sight of basic fairness and property rights. You were right about the hill. You were right about the road. I was wrong, and I let my pride turn a simple property dispute into a nightmare for everyone involved. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now that I was out of line. I'm sorry for the damage I caused to your fence and for all the stress I put you through. Linda Patterson." I read the letter twice. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was something. Growth, maybe, recognition of fault. That was more than I'd expected. I wrote back, keeping it brief. "Linda, I appreciate your letter and your apology. I accept it. I hope you find peace and purpose beyond the HOA board. There's no permanent hard feelings on my end. Best wishes, Trevor Emerson." 2 years later, the Sledding Hill had become a neighborhood institution. Every winter, I'd open it up for community use on weekends. I'd installed some solar-powered lights so kids could sled safely until early evening. The licensing fees from the access road had more than paid for all my initial costs, and I'd even improved the road surface, which benefited everyone who used it. Linda and George had moved out of the neighborhood about a year after the court case. Frank told me they'd relocated to a condo in downtown Boulder, somewhere without an HOA. I wished them well. The HOA under Frank's leadership had become genuinely helpful rather than authoritarian. They focused on actual community needs, like maintaining common areas and organizing social events. The special assessment that Linda had pushed through was refunded to homeowners. The neighborhood felt friendlier, more cohesive. I never forgot the lesson, though. Property rights matter. Documentation matters. And sometimes standing up to a bully, even when it's difficult and expensive, is the right thing to do. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who might be bullied next. The Sledding Hill remained mine, clearly marked and legally documented beyond any shadow of doubt. But it was also a place of joy for the community, shared on my terms, which made all the difference. I protected what was mine and still found a way to be generous with it. That balance, I realized, was what real community was supposed to be about. On winter Saturday mornings, I'd make hot chocolate and bring it up to the hill in thermoses. Kids would line up for cups, their cheeks red from the cold and their eyes bright with excitement. Parents would thank me, and I'd watch sleds race down the slope that Linda Patterson had once tried to claim. The fence stood strong, a reminder of boundaries respected. The gate opened smoothly, providing access to those who'd negotiated in good faith. And the hill itself, covered in snow and echoing with laughter, proved that defending your rights and being part of a community weren't mutually exclusive. They just required respect. For property, for people, and for the law that protected both. Marcus sometimes joked that he should use my case as a teaching example in property law seminars. "It's got everything," he'd say. "Boundary disputes, easement law, HOA overreach, creative problem solving, and even a bit of criminal drama." I'd laugh and tell him he was welcome to use it, as long as he changed the names to protect the guilty. The story spread beyond our neighborhood. I'd occasionally get calls from homeowners in other developments who were dealing with their own HOA problems. I wasn't an expert, but I'd share what I'd learned. Document everything, know your property boundaries, understand your legal rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself when you're in the right. One particularly satisfying moment came during an HOA meeting 2 years after the initial dispute. The board was discussing updates to the community CC and Articus, and Frank proposed adding language that explicitly protected individual property rights and required the board to verify legal ownership before taking any action regarding property disputes. The measure passed unanimously. They even named it the Emerson Clause informally, though it didn't appear that way in the official documents. It was a small thing, but it meant that future homeowners in our development would have clear protection against the kind of overreach that Linda had attempted. I also made peace with the fact that some people in the neighborhood probably still thought I'd been unreasonable. There were a few who believed I should have just let the HOA use the hill without fighting. They didn't understand that it wasn't about the hill itself. It was about the principle that you can't just take what isn't yours, no matter how convinced you are that you have the right to do so. The licensing fees continued to provide a small but steady income. I used the money to make improvements to the access road and to fund neighborhood projects. When the playground equipment needed updating, I donated a significant portion of the cost. When the community wanted to install better lighting along the walking paths, I contributed. It felt right to reinvest in the neighborhood, to show that my fight had never been against the community itself, just against those who tried to abuse their authority. One of the most rewarding outcomes was the relationship I developed with Frank and several other neighbors. Before the dispute, I'd been friendly but distant with most people in the development. The conflict had forced me to engage, to attend meetings, to get to know people. In an odd way, Linda's overreach had made me more connected to my community, not less. The sledding hill itself became a point of pride. I maintained it carefully, making sure the slope was safe and free of obstacles. In the summer, it was a beautiful grassy hill perfect for rolling down or flying kites. In the fall, the trees at the base turned brilliant colors. And in winter, it was the best sledding spot in the entire area. Local families from outside the development would sometimes ask if they could use it. I usually said yes, as long as they were respectful. My property, my rules, my choice to share. That distinction remained important to me. 3 years after the initial dispute, I was elected to the HOA board myself. It wasn't something I'd sought out, but several neighbors encouraged me to run, and I won easily. Serving on the board gave me insight into just how wrong Linda's approach had been. There were so many real issues that needed attention: maintaining infrastructure, managing the budget, organizing community events. Wasting time and resources on trying to seize property that didn't belong to the HOA had been worse than just wrong. It had been a betrayal of her responsibility to the community. During my time on the board, we implemented several reforms. We required that any legal action be approved by a majority vote of homeowners, not just the board. We created a transparent budget process. We established clear procedures for property disputes that required verification of ownership before any action could be taken. These changes made the HOA stronger and more accountable. I thought about Linda sometimes, wondering how she was doing in her new home without an HOA to run. I hoped she'd found peace and perspective. The last I'd heard, she'd gotten involved in a local charity and was channeling her organizational energy into actually helpful causes. If that was true, then maybe something good had come from the whole mess after all. The restraining order had expired after her probation ended, but Linda never contacted me again. The apology letter remained the last communication between us. That was fine with me. Some chapters of life are better left closed. My attorney Marcus became a good friend through the whole process. We'd grab lunch every few months and catch up. He'd tell me about other property disputes he was handling, and I'd share updates on neighborhood life. He admitted that my case had actually helped his practice, because word got around that he was the attorney who'd successfully defended a homeowner against aggressive HOA overreach. The Sledding Hill dispute became something of a local legend. The Boulder newspaper did a follow-up story 2 years later, focusing on how the neighborhood had transformed after the conflict. The article highlighted the reforms we'd made to the HOA structure and how the Sledding Hill had become a community gathering place. It was a nice piece that focused on the positive outcomes rather than just the drama. I framed my property deed and hung it in my home office, not out of spite but as a reminder of the importance of knowing your rights and standing up for them. It was also a reminder that legal documents matter. That survey, that deed, those easement terms, they'd all been crucial to protecting what was mine. The gate across the access road still stood, though it was open most of the time now. The licensing agreements remained in effect, but they'd become almost invisible parts of the neighborhood routine. The fees were paid automatically each month, the road was well maintained, and everyone who needed access had it. It worked because it was based on respect and clear agreements rather than assumptions and power plays. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that the HOA dispute had taught me more than just property law. It had taught me about community dynamics, about the importance of documentation, about when to compromise and when to stand firm. It had taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is the difficult thing, and that defending your principles can be costly in the short term but valuable in the long run. The Sledding Hill remained the physical symbol of all these lessons. Every time I looked out my back window and saw that fence line, clearly marked and undisputed, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won a fight, but because I'd protected something important and then chosen to share it generously with others. As winter approached in the 5th year after the dispute, I prepared the Sledding Hill for another season. I checked the lights, made sure the slope was clear of debris, and posted signs welcoming neighborhood kids to use it on weekends. The fence stood strong, the gate worked smoothly, and the property boundaries were clear to everyone. The first snow of the season fell on a Saturday morning. By noon, the hill was covered with kids and sleds, their laughter echoing across my property. I stood at the top with my thermos of hot chocolate, watching the joy that a simple snowy hill could bring. A new family in the neighborhood approached me. They just moved in a month earlier. "Mr. Emerson," the father said, "I'm Daniel Martinez. We're in the house on Oakwood Drive. My kids have been asking about the Sledding Hill. Is it really okay for them to use it?" "Absolutely," I said. "That's what it's here for." "We heard there was some drama about this hill a few years back," he said. "There was," I acknowledged, "but that's all resolved now. The hill is mine, the boundaries are clear, and I share it with the neighborhood because I want to, not because anyone's making me." Daniel smiled. "That's a good way to be. Thanks for being generous with your property." As his kids ran off to join the other sledders, I thought about how far we'd all come from that morning when Linda Patterson had shown up at my door with her folder and her misguided certainty. The neighborhood was stronger now. The HOA was more functional. Property rights were respected. And a sledding hill that might have become a source of permanent division had instead become a place where community happened. That evening, as the last families headed home, and the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, I walked the fence line one more time. Every post was solid. Every board was intact. Every no trespassing sign was exactly where it should be, a reminder that good fences make good neighbors, but only when everyone respects what those fences mean. I locked the gate to the hill for the night, knowing I'd open it again the next weekend. The access road gate stood ready to open for the 4 households who'd negotiated fairly for the right to use my property. Everything was in its proper place, legal and clear, and mutually agreed upon. Inside my house, I filed away the licensing fee payments that had arrived that week. The money went into a dedicated account I used for neighborhood improvements and property maintenance. It felt right that the solution to the conflict continued to benefit everyone involved. As I settled in for the evening, I pulled up the county property records on my computer one more time, just to look at my clearly marked boundaries, my properly recorded deed, and the official documentation of the easement agreements. It was all there, black and white, legal and binding. Linda Patterson had tried to claim my Sledding Hill through force of will and misplaced authority. She'd failed because property rights aren't determined by who's most aggressive or most convinced they're right. They're determined by law, by documentation, by surveys and deeds and legal processes. I'd fenced the hill to protect what was mine. I'd charged rent for the access road because it was my property and I had every right to do so. And in the end, those actions had led to a better, stronger, more respectful community. The Sledding Hill was mine. The documentation proved it. The fence marked it. The law protected it. And I shared it freely because I chose to, which made all the difference. That was the real victory. Not over Linda Patterson or the HOA board, but over the idea that might makes right or that positions of petty authority can override legal property ownership. The victory was in standing up for what was mine, doing it the right way, and then finding a way to make it benefit everyone. As winter deepened and the sledding season continued, the hill saw more use than ever. The neighborhood kids knew every bump and curve of that slope. Parents knew they could trust me to keep it safe and accessible. And everyone understood that respect for property rights and community spirit could coexist. The story of the HOA that tried to claim my Sledding Hill became one of those neighborhood tales that got told to newcomers, usually with a mix of amusement and disbelief. It served as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and a positive example of how conflicts could be resolved through proper legal channels. For me, it remained a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult and expensive and stressful. and that the fight is worth it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after. The sledding hill was mine, properly and legally mine, and that would never be in question again.